On a warm Monday afternoon in the summer of 1993, on a remote farm in the green hills of South Wales, an elderly couple sat down to lunch. Their best china was laid out on the table. Tea had been made. A place had been set for a guest, someone important enough that the good crockery came out, the crockery they only ever used for a special visitor. That lunch was never eaten. Within a matter of minutes, both of them were dead, shot at point-blank range, in the back of the head, execution style. And their killer did something chilling and deliberate. He dragged their bodies across the farm, hid them beneath hay and carpet in a cowshed, and vanished into the Welsh countryside. That was more than 32 years ago, and for more than 3 decades, the murder of Harry and Megan Tooze has stood as one of the most baffling, most notorious unsolved crimes in the history of Wales. A case that saw an innocent man jailed for life and then set free. A case with a laid-out teacup that has haunted investigators for a generation. A case where the killer, it seemed, had simply gotten away with it forever. But in December of 2025, 32 years on, everything changed, because South Wales police knocked on a door, and they arrested an 86-year-old man. This is the story of the Tooze Farmhouse murders. This is Crimewatch UK. To understand why this case has gripped Wales for over 30 years, you first need to understand who Harry and Megan Tooze were, and the quiet, ordinary world they lived in. Harry Tooze was 64 years old. Some accounts say 65. His wife, Megan, was 67. They lived together on a farm called Waun, a remote property tucked into the countryside just north of the village of Llanharry, in Rhondda Cynon Taf. This was rural Wales at its most peaceful, rolling fields, hedgerows, a scattering of farms connected by narrow country lanes. The kind of place where, in the 60 years before what happened to the Toozes, the community had recorded just a single break-in. One in 6 decades. That is how safe this corner of the world was. Harry was a well-known figure locally. For years, he'd run a market garden and fruit wholesale business, and even in retirement, he'd stepped back about 7 years earlier. He couldn't quite give it up. He still spent his days growing cabbages on the farm. To keep the rabbits from eating those cabbages, he kept a shotgun. Remember that shotgun, because it matters. About a year before the murders, in 1992, that gun was mysteriously stolen from the farm. A quiet, unremarkable theft at the time. It would take on enormous significance later. Harry and Megan were, by every account, an unremarkable and gentle couple, living what people described as an uneventful life. They had one daughter, their only child, Cheryl. Megan was a religious woman, and both she and Harry held strong, traditional values. That, too, becomes important, because when Cheryl moved away and began living with her boyfriend before marriage, it was something the Toozes kept quiet, something they found difficult, a small family tension, of the kind almost every family has, nothing that could have hinted at what was coming. So let me take you to the day itself, Monday, the 26th of July, 1993. That morning, Harry and Megan did exactly what they did every week. They left the farm, drove their Land Rover to the local Tesco to do their weekly shop, and stopped to collect their pensions on the way. While he was out, Harry bumped into one of his sisters. She spoke to him. She noticed nothing unusual, nothing troubled, just her brother, going about his ordinary Monday. A neighbor saw the couple arrive back at the farm at around 11 o'clock in the morning. And then, at around 1:30 in the afternoon, neighbors heard 2 gunshots, about 30 seconds apart. But here is the tragedy of that remote, peaceful place. Nobody thought anything of it. They knew Harry shot rabbits. 2 shots on a summer afternoon on a Welsh farm was the most normal sound in the world. Nobody looked up. Nobody worried. Life carried on. That evening, Cheryl tried to phone her parents, as she did every day. No answer. She tried again. Still nothing. Now she was worried. She rang their neighbors and asked them to check. When there was no sign of Harry and Megan at the house, the police were called. When officers arrived and searched the farm, they made a discovery that would haunt everyone connected to this case for the next 3 decades. In the cowshed, out of sight of any neighbor, they found the bodies of Harry and Megan Tooze. Both had been shot once, in the back of the head, from around 2 to 3 feet away. And both had been deliberately concealed. Harry's body had been placed in a trough and covered with hay and tarpaulin. Megan's had been covered with a carpet. But the scene told a stranger, more unsettling story than a simple shooting. Because the investigators quickly realized the couple had not been killed in that cowshed. There were drag marks. Forensic analysis suggested Harry had been shot just inside the door of the cowshed, but Megan had been shot on the other side of the property, over near the farmhouse. Possibly, detectives thought, as she tried to flee. Their bodies had then been moved, carried, and hidden together, and the timing of the body movement, based on the forensic evidence, suggested Harry had been moved 3 to 4 hours after he died. This was not a panic. This was not a robbery interrupted. This was methodical, cold. The killer had taken his time. And then there was the detail inside the farmhouse. The detail that has become the eerie, unforgettable signature of this entire case. The kitchen table was set for lunch. Out was the couple's very best china. Crockery that, according to those who knew them, was only ever brought out when an important visitor was present. It was never used for everyday meals. And there was a teacup on that table. A specific teacup. One the family said was reserved for special guests. Nearby sat Megan's own favorite mug, and Harry's mug too, suggesting that the couple themselves had not been the ones drinking from that special cup. Someone else had been there. Someone worth the good china. There was more. A clean white shirt of Harry's had been laid out on the bed, as though he were expecting company or preparing to go out for some social engagement. The lunch itself sat cooked on the stove, but uneaten. The stove had been turned off. Piece it all together, and a picture forms, doesn't it? Harry and Megan Tooze had come home from their weekly shop. They had begun to prepare lunch, and then someone had arrived. Someone they knew, someone important enough that they turned off the stove, laid out the best china, and set the table for a guest. Someone they were, in every sense, expecting to welcome. And that someone shot them both in the back of the head. The lead detective on the case put it starkly. He said the killing bore all the hallmarks of an execution. It was carefully planned, and crucially, he believed the killer knew his victims, and they knew him. He said the killer knew their daily habits, knew their property, knew its layout. This was not a stranger who stumbled onto a remote farm. This was someone who belonged in Harry and Megan's world. The investigators ruled out the obvious alternatives one by one. Murder-suicide was dismissed because of those drag marks. A dead couple cannot hide their own bodies. Robbery was dismissed too, and this is telling. Nothing had been stolen. Money and valuable jewelry were left untouched in the house. Harry himself had 75 pounds in his pocket, and it was still there. Whatever the motive was, it was not theft. The detective in charge called it the most baffling case he had ever investigated. And so, 2 months after the murders, in September 1993, the case went out to the nation on the BBC's Crimewatch. A reconstruction was aired. An appeal was made. Please, if you were the visitor to that farmhouse, come forward and eliminate yourself. Please, anyone who knew what happened to Harry's stolen shotgun, come forward. A busy motorway ran near Llanharry. Perhaps a passerby had seen something, but the appeals produced no clear answer. And the investigation turned, as it perhaps inevitably would, toward the one person whose arrival might explain that laid-out teacup. The Tooze's daughter Cheryl was, at the time of the murders, living in Orpington, in Kent, over 200 miles away, with her boyfriend, a man named Jonathan Jones. And I want to be very careful and fair here, because what happened to Jonathan Jones is one of the most important and cautionary parts of this entire story. Jones was, like the Toozes, originally from Wales. He and Cheryl visited the farm regularly. He had been trying to build a career, first as a recruitment consultant, then attempting to launch his own marketing business. But by the summer of 1993, things were going badly. The couple were falling behind on their payments and were, in fact, about to lose their flat, something Jones had reportedly kept from Cheryl. And here is where the police interest sharpened. Harry and Megan Tooze had a life insurance policy worth £150,000. Cheryl was the sole beneficiary of her parents' estate. In the eyes of investigators struggling for a motive, that money looked like one. The case built against Jones piece by piece. Witnesses had reported seeing a man, in the weeks before the murders, walking along a road near the farm, wearing a beige trench coat and dark sunglasses, hiding his face from passing cars. One of those witnesses later told police she recognized that man as Jonathan Jones. Jones acknowledged he'd been in the area, but gave an innocent explanation. Friends said he owned a trench coat matching the description. He and Cheryl insisted he did not. Then came the piece of evidence that would put him in prison. That special teacup, the one set out for the important visitor. Jones's fingerprint was on it. His print, on the cup that only came out for a guest, despite him and Cheryl denying he'd ever used it. Apart from Harry's and Megan's own prints, his was the only fingerprint found on the items at the scene. And his alibi fell apart. Jones said he had taken that Monday off to look for office premises in Orpington, meeting estate agents. But police could find no estate agent who had seen him, no witness who could confirm his account. He claimed to have chatted with a lift engineer at his flat around 1:30, the very time of the murders, but the engineers working that day recalled no such conversation and said they'd been out at lunch. He'd failed to return a rented videotape along the route he claimed to have walked, and Cheryl herself would admit to police that she couldn't say whether Jones had been at the flat that day at all. Jones later admitted he had lied about making inquiries with estate agents. The prosecution's theory was that Jones had traveled by train from Kent to Wales that morning, surprised Harry and Megan as they made lunch, prompting the good china, perhaps because they thought he'd come to ask for their blessing to marry Cheryl, killed them both, and traveled back. In 1995, Jonathan Jones was brought to trial, and although many observers at the time believed the evidence was too thin to convict, the jury took just 2 hours to find him guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison for the murders of Harry and Megan Tooze. And here is the thing you must hold on to. He did not do it. Cheryl never wavered. She was dismayed by the verdict and stood by him completely, even offering a £25,000 reward, drawn from the very inheritance she'd received from her murdered parents, for evidence that would prove his innocence. It fractured her family. Her aunt, Megan's own sister, was appalled, saying she was happy Jones was where he should be and that Cheryl had been blinded by the man. The jurors defended their verdict, insisting they were educated people who had judged the evidence honestly. But a year later, in 1996, the Court of Appeal heard Jonathan Jones's case, and 3 appeal court judges took just 5 minutes to reach their decision. They quashed his conviction. It emerged that the trial judge had been criticized and, critically, that the police had failed to properly seal the crime scene. The evidence simply did not support the conviction. Jones was freed. He and Cheryl embraced outside the court, and she declared his release a victory for love and truth. They later married and raised a son together. Think about what that means for this story. The justice system took an innocent man, convicted him of murdering his girlfriend's parents, and jailed him for life, and it took an appeal to undo it. Jonathan Jones did not even receive compensation, because clearing a conviction on legal grounds is not the same as proving innocence in law. He carried the shadow of it for years, and it means that for the true killer of Harry and Megan Tooze, the wrongful conviction of Jonathan Jones was, in a grim sense, a gift. While an innocent man sat in a cell, the real murderer walked free, and with Jones cleared, the case fell open again, legally unsolved, and it has remained so ever since. But the investigation never entirely died, and over the following years, it threw up some genuinely strange and tantalizing developments. In 2000, 2 separate reviews of the case were carried out, though their findings were never made public, deliberately kept secret so as not to prejudice any future trial. Then, around the 10th anniversary in 2003, police revealed something remarkable. In November 2002, they had received an anonymous letter. They believed it was genuine, believed it came from someone local, and appealed for the writer to come forward. Its contents have never been published to this day. The lead detective didn't think it came from the killer, but from someone, perhaps, who knew something. That same period brought physical discoveries. In a search, police found shotgun cartridges hidden in a flooded iron ore mine shaft on nearby land, stuffed in a black hold-all bag with distinctive gold lettering. The original investigation, it turned out, had received an anonymous tip years earlier that items had been dumped down a nearby shaft but hadn't been able to search it at the time. And in a quarry just half a mile from the farm, investigators found the barrels of a dismantled, double-barreled 12-bore shotgun, the same type of weapon used in the murders. Experts concluded the gun had been taken apart by someone with real firearms expertise. For a while, these finds electrified the case, but by 2008, South Wales Police announced that all lines of inquiry had been exhausted. The investigation was scaled down, and detectives had come to believe those gun-related items were not, after all, connected to the crime. There was one more intriguing thread. In 2011, a man named John Cooper was convicted of a series of shotgun murders in Pembrokeshire in the 1980s. A notorious serial killer whose story was later dramatized in the television series The Pembrokeshire Murders. And detectives ask the obvious question: could there be a connection to the Tooze case? There were surface similarities. Both involved couples shot at close range with a shotgun. Both involved attempts to hide the bodies. Double shotgun murders are genuinely rare, and here was a man who had committed 2 of them. Jones's own lawyer argued Cooper was a far better suspect than his client had ever been, but when police examined it, the theory didn't hold. Harry and Megan wouldn't have known Cooper, which couldn't explain the best china laid out for a welcome guest. Cooper stole from his victims. Nothing was stolen from the Tooze farm. Cooper targeted areas he knew intimately, all close to his home in Pembrokeshire, and wasn't familiar with the Llanharry area. And he shot his victims face on, not, as in the Tooze murders, in the back of the head. No evidence was ever found to conclusively link him to the case. So the years passed, a decade, 2 decades. The Tooze murders settled into their place as one of Wales's great unsolved mysteries, a fixture in true crime books and podcasts, a source of enduring local grief. In the village of Llanharry, people never forgot. The killing had shattered a community that thought itself immune to such things, and stirred fears at the time that a serial killer might be at large. And then came the development that brings us to today. On the 26th of July, 2023, exactly 30 years after the murders, South Wales Police announced they were launching a fresh forensic review of the case. Now, this matters, and it's a theme we see again and again in cold cases. Forensic science in 1993 was a world away from what exists today. DNA techniques of the early 90s needed large, well-preserved samples and could do nothing with tiny traces. In the 3 decades since, the science has advanced almost beyond recognition, capable now of extracting profiles from the faintest, most degraded material. A cold case review isn't just rereading old files. It's taking the physical evidence preserved from 1993 and asking whether the science of the 2020s can finally make it speak. For over 2 years, that review ran quietly in the background. And then, on the 17th of December, 2025, South Wales Police made the announcement that stunned everyone following this case. They had arrested a man in connection with the murders of Harry and Megan Tooze, an 86-year-old man. Let me be absolutely precise about this, because precision is everything here. The man was arrested on suspicion of murder. The following day, police confirmed he had been released on bail. He has not been charged. He has not been tried, and he is entitled, like anyone, to the full presumption of innocence. An arrest is not a conviction, and it is emphatically not a solved case. A fact this very investigation, which once jailed the innocent Jonathan Jones, understands better than almost any other in Britain. I will not name him, because he stands accused of nothing in law, and it would be wrong to do so. The senior investigating officer, Detective Superintendent Mark Lewis, chose his words carefully. He called the arrest a significant development, but stressed that the inquiries are very much ongoing. He spoke about the many people this case has affected over the years, and said the aim was to find the answers to the questions that still surround these deaths after more than 3 decades. And he did what detectives on this case have done for 32 years. He appealed to the public. Even with all this passage of time, he said, anyone with any information about the murders should come forward and speak to police. So think about where that leaves us tonight. Consider the age of that arrested man, 86 years old in December 2025, which means that in July of 1993, on the afternoon those 2 shots rang out across the Welsh countryside, he would have been in his early to mid-50s, a grown man, of exactly the generation that would have known Harry and Megan Tooze, that would have moved in their world, that might have been the kind of familiar visitor for whom the best china came out. I want to be clear that I am not asserting anything about this individual. The police have not, and neither will I. But the arithmetic of that age is part of why this arrest has struck so many people so forcefully. And consider what remains unresolved. We still do not know, for certain, who set that teacup down and left a fingerprint that wasn't theirs. We do not know for certain what happened to Harry's shotgun, stolen a year before he died. We do not know who wrote that anonymous letter in 2002. And after 32 years, we do not yet know whether this arrest will finally deliver the answer or become one more twist in a case that has resisted resolution for a generation. But we do know this. Somewhere, the truth of that summer afternoon exists. It exists in the forensic evidence preserved since 1993, now being examined with tools its original investigators could never have dreamed of. It exists, perhaps, in the memory of someone in that community who has held a secret for 32 years. And it exists in the quiet, patient work of a cold case team that refused to close the file. Harry and Megan Tooze were an ordinary couple who grew cabbages and lived a quiet life and set their table for a guest they trusted. They deserve the truth. Their daughter Cheryl, who lost both parents and then watched the man she loved wrongly convicted of killing them, deserves the truth. And so does Jonathan Jones, who spent time in a prison cell for a crime he did not commit. After more than 3 decades, everyone touched by this case is owed an answer. Whether the events set in motion in December 2025 will finally provide one, we simply don't yet know. But for the first time in a very long time, this case is moving again. We'll be following the Tooze investigation closely as it develops. If you want to be here when there's news, subscribe to Crimewatch UK and turn on notifications. And in the comments, tell us what you make of it. After everything this case has been through, do you believe the truth is finally within reach? We read every reply. Until next time, because as this case reminds us more than most, the search for justice can take a very, very long time. But it does not stop.